Good afternoon. We have a special guest today, Gene Epstein, former editor and economics editor and books editor of Barron's and present debate director of the SoHo Forum. And we're going to discuss a little question I have about socialism, his libertarian take on it specifically. I noticed in both of your debates, both with Bhaskar Sunkara and Professor Wolff, that you had a very ground up view of socialism. Your critique was that there was nothing going to stop it in capitalism. If you just started a workers' co-op or any kind of business like that, you could just start it. And if it took off, it took off. And if it didn't, it didn't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Would you say that's basically your view?
Yeah. Let me elaborate a bit on that, of course. But I'll also add that I've done 3 debates, not 2. My third was with Ben Burgess, that's down in Florida, and that is available on our site. And so that's Bhaskar, Ben Burgess, as well as Dick Wolff. And the debate with Richard Wolff has had 5.5 million YouTube views.
Yes,
My debate with the other 2, with Bhaskar and with Ben, have had a little over 100,000. Which is pretty good, but the 5.5 million is off the wall. Surprises me. It keeps climbing. So the word has gotten out. So a lot of people are pretty familiar with my argument. I should mention that Ben Burgess certainly, and maybe the other 2, I'm not sure. Ben Burgess, in his Social Society, he wants to make it a matter of law that you be a part of a worker co-op. You are a felon if you don't work in a worker co-op. If you voluntarily choose to work in a conventionally run firm, then you are in violation of the law, and he could possibly put you in a cage for that. But getting back to the broad outlines of your question, the socialists constantly talk about Mondragon in Spain, very large industrial company that is worker owned. Now, in the same breath, I believe they would agree that Spain is mainly a capitalist country. It has a stock market, has private ownership of the means production. I, by the way, was interested as a researcher in the worker ownership movement back in the 1980s, and they were talking about Mondragon then. So the point about Mondragon is that if it's a showcase for the success of worker ownership, it obviously shows that if a company of that size can be started in a poorer economy, Spain, than in the U.S., it's perfectly possible to have Mondragons in the U.S. Doesn't seem to be too much interest in it since more than 30 years have passed, 40 years have passed, and we still do not have a worker-owned company of the size and scale of Mondragon in the U.S. We do have some worker-owned companies, however. My point as well is that it's not just that workers have the financial firepower on the investment side. There's trillions of dollars in the hands of labor unions, many trillions in the hands of labor unions worldwide. The lower 90% has about 16 trillion in wealth. The lower 90% accounts for about 80% of all consumer spending. So that they're wielding the consumer dollar in the direction of worker-owned companies, could bring those companies alive and make it difficult for conventionally run firms to operate. And so all of those things are quite possible if workers were the least bit interested in worker ownership. All quite possible under capitalism. And so I'm just trying to call their bluff. I'm 78 years old. I was an active sort of left-leaning person in the 1960s and 70s. I was part of a commune for a while. We decided to form our own alternatives voluntarily. We didn't wait for the government to do it. Communes were fun for a while, but they really couldn't last. And so, again, I encourage all of them, except, of course, for Ben Burgess, who wants to throw you in a cage if you refuse to be a part of a worker-owned company. He's an authoritarian, but I'm not even sure about Bhaskar and Dick Wolff. But go for it. Start worker-owned companies. Try to persuade workers to form these companies. Maybe they don't want to. Polls show, amazingly, that most workers are not that dissatisfied with their jobs. I worked for News Corp for many years, part of Barron's. I didn't want to take on the headaches of running the company, or going to meetings to vote on what they were going to do next. I just wanted to stick to my knitting and do what I was doing, write about the economy and be the books editor. Many of us seem to prefer that option. I'm a part of a co-op building. Co-ops exist in terms of real estate, and on balance, I'd probably prefer to be part of a landlord building, because if you are part of a co-op, you've got to put up with some of the other people who live in the building. If you're part of a worker co-op, you've got to put up with many of the other people who work in the co-op, and those people could be just as much of a pain in the neck, if not more so, than in conventionally run firms. So that's my basic summary of the main thrust of the socialist movement as represented by these three people.
And I was very impressed with that. I have to say that you took such a grassroots approach to the problem, whereas everyone else was doing this top down, where it always had to come from the government first. We had to have the political movement, then the labor movement, and then finally somehow magically the socialist movement would burst onto the scene.
Yeah, well, no, they want indeed, Dick Wolff, he wants and all of them, they want the iron fist of government to bring this about. They want government. They want 51% of the people to vote in, and ideally, 51% of the people will vote in a government that will then dictate to all of us about how we run our firms. And obviously, that's the old story of socialism. That it has historically been brought about by the iron fist of government from above, rather than from below. And again, I also made the point that my proposal was really more in the spirit of classical Marxism than what they were talking about. Because the classic scenario of Marxism is that the workers get fed up and they want to take over the means of production. So if the workers are fed up, that's what they'll do. And that's probably will go the same sort of observation go for your interview with Juliet Schor, which I briefly listened to. But she's not really a socialist, I guess. I
don't think she is either. But she did see a ground up swelling during the 2008 issue with the economy.
She's a Republican. See, well, okay, we can talk about Juliet Schor, but you may have some more questions about socialism. So,
well, no, what I was going to get to with you is that what impressed me, because technically I'm more of an anarcho-syndicalist myself.
Oh, okay, well, that's fine. By the way, no, I wanted to add some other point about the usual approach to socialism, which is that many of my colleagues who are free market oriented, when they debate socialists, they just express skepticism about how well Mondragon is really run, or they present skepticism about whether worker-owned companies would succeed. We can get into that, but again, I believe that they're missing the main point, which is to stress that capitalism is defined as private ownership of the means of production and property enforced by the rule of law. The rule of law, of course, anarchists argue, would be better enforced under a state of anarchy than under government. But in all cases, anarchists tend to believe in the rule of law. I imagine you do as well.
Sure.
And so the rule of law guarantees that your property rights in the means of production will be respected. And so that's capitalism, full stop. It doesn't say anything about who owns the means of production. The workers could own it. One person could own it. 20% of the people in the company could own it. It's all up to how people prefer to run their lives. But okay, go back to your anarcho-syndicalist.
Well, that's very true. I mean, that what you're saying, and that's the way I see it, is that we don't have to wait for the government to push this on. We can start it right now. You can do it with almost anything. You can go to your building and turn it into a co-op.
Yes.
A cooperatively owned building. Classically speaking, New York has got many cooperatively owned buildings.
Yeah, and actually, although ironically, that was partly because of rent control and rent stabilization, by the way. It's an interesting story. It was a ploy by a landlord to sort of cash out They co-opted their buildings because rent stabilization was making it hard to make a decent living from running the buildings. So that is an irony of history, by the way. I have somebody at the door. I'm too busy. Yeah. Anyway, back to you. The only way I would rephrase that would be to say, of course, from my standpoint as a libertarian, I would say that if we do wait for the government, as you put it, then socialism will be born in corruption, just like all the previous socialisms basically were. If the iron fist of government is going to impose it from above, you will not have a socialism worthy of the name or worthy of keeping. You will not have the sort of thing you want worthy of keeping. Apart from that, obviously, it sounds a little bit absurd for you to even imagine that the government is going to bring about anarcho-syndicalism.
Oh yeah, that.
Those schmucks in government. I got to break this to you, Connor. None of them are anarcho-syndicalists.
Oh, I know.
Go ahead. But Connor, why do you name yourself after Leon Trotsky? You think he was your kind of anarcho?
No, he wasn't.
Oh, so Jake, what is it now?
It started off as a joke.
Okay.
Did you ever see the movie the Trotsky? Where this kid believes that he's the reincarnated Leon Trotsky. And what I was going to originally do with the account was basically give a Trotskyist reply to everybody who I didn't like or to annoy them. But then I decided to use it for something real. So I just added that. I mean, I do like some of his ideas, but I tend to move more towards Peter Kropotkin. And
well, Trotsky had a strong authoritarian leanings, didn't he? Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would say, and his 1918 put down of the anarchists in the Navy is not a bright moment for anybody.
I see. Yeah,
but so the name stuck, and I started to get a following with it, so I left it, and that's the reason why. But it doesn't.
Well, yeah. Well, syndicalism, I guess it has historical roots. I'm going to elaborate on what you mean. If all it means is that the workers own the company and they periodically meet and vote on how to run it, I can only say that most people don't seem to be too interested in that. Most of us just want to just do our jobs and earn our salary and go home and think about other things in life rather than the headaches of running a company. But get back to your argument why do you advocate anarcho-syndicalism?
Well, I think it has the greatest opportunity for both democracy in the workplace and outside of it, because basically the workplace is your whole life. I mean, whether you're outside or inside, you know.
Well, yes, but the point is that, but I guess the basic question then is, what's so great about democracy? joke about democracy. It's the right of 51% of the people to piss in the soup of the other 49%. Truthfully, democracy is just a necessary evil. We basically, did we put it to a vote? I work in this office and other people around it. Did I ask them to vote on whether I'm going to spend my time being interviewed by you? No, it's just an agreement between the two of us. We want, to the maximum extent possible, we just want to operate without putting anything to a vote. But apart from that, when you're in a so-called democracy or in a co-op, again, you're under the thumb of the vote of 51% of your fellows, and some of those decisions could be just as awful for your particular place in the firm as the decisions reached by a boss or by an authoritarian situation. And we do tend to minimize the power that many of us have. If you're a decent worker, the firm wants to keep you. They want to make you reasonably happy. They want to create working conditions that you find reasonably acceptable, or you're going to take your labor elsewhere. The idea that we have no power in a conventional firm is ridiculous. We do have a certain degree of power, but apart from that, it doesn't seem as though most people want to work for a firm and then think about the headaches of running that firm. It's been. I mean, again, I'm. How old are you now, Connor? You're a little gray beard there. You're 42.
Exactly. You got the age exactly.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay, so I'm 78. So I'm not quite twice your age, kind of. That would make me 84. Just but that aside, again, I had a certain enthusiasm for the worker ownership movement in the early 80s. As a matter of fact, I wrote an article for National Review, which they ran, the sort of right-wing publication about worker ownership and saying how it's fine, let's do it. It's welcome. By the way, I will also stress, ironically, despite what I've just said, I would actually prefer to see more interest in worker ownership, partly because, or mainly because, really, I would like to see more people understand the headaches of running a firm. More people sort of grow up and recognize that the firm you work for does not necessarily have a fountain of money to bestow on you. They've got to compete in the marketplace. They always face the threat of bankruptcy. They've got to make new entrepreneurial decisions all the time in order to stay afloat. It is mainly a competitive marketplace that we live in, and therefore I think it would be good if people were to understand that better than they do at the moment. And of course, they would understand that better if they became a part of a worker-owned firm. Similarly, of course, if you're part of a co-op, then you understand a lot better all the headaches of running a building. All of that is true. However, I can't get my way. Workers mainly do not seem to be interested in worker, and it's been a 40 to 50 year fight for it. Perhaps you're aware of ESOPs.
Sure.
Russell Long, Russell Long was a senator who was the son of famous Governor Huey Long. He brought about a tax plan called the employee stock ownership plans, and you still do get, if a company becomes an ESOP, an employee stock ownership plan is implemented, then they do get a tax break. So there's in fact government policy that encourages worker ownership, and yet it hasn't really taken hold.
No, it hasn't. And as you described, Mondragoon is sort of this mythical place for a lot of socialists on the left in America.
Well, I don't know enough about it to say how mythical it really is. I found, I don't know if you know Noam Chomsky. Mm-hmm. I was a big fan of his. He used to criticize Mondragon. He used to say it was a fraud, and now he sings a different tune. I don't know how Mondragon is really.
I don't think it's a complete fraud.
No. Well, the only thing about exactly. I'm just saying that he used to say that. Now he's for it, but not a complete. But although I will say that one of the things that is true about Mondragon that I do know is that increasingly they've been employing foreign workers. That essentially they have a two-tiered system now.
Yes.
And then if you actually bore into it, that seems to be part of the contradiction of a worker-owned firm. They don't want to take on more worker owners. They've been taking on more employees. But that aside, I'm not interested in that. I'm only interested in saying, good, Mondragon was brought about in the poor country of Spain.
Under Franco.
What?
Under Franco, no less.
Yeah, right, exactly. And it's a capitalist country. So go for it. Bring about a Mondragon. Did I say 40 years? It's been going on 50 years that Mondragon was supposed to happen here, and yet somehow you can't get it off the ground. And then, of course, basically Bhaskar and Wolff and Burgess, they prefer to sit on their butts and opine about these things rather than actually get down into the trenches and try to build these companies, try to get people interested in them.
Well, that was the point I was going to bring up next, is that it seems that the socialist left is mired in the theory of Marx and not the practical application of Marxism.
Well, of course, the practical application for them is that, what was it? Jeremy Corbyn was he ran for prime minister a few years ago, and Dick Wolff was really looking forward to it because Jeremy Corbyn was going to bring about socialism through the iron fist of government. This is what they want. They think it's really fine. And of course, I guess my only disagreement with you, Connor, is that you use the word democracy like it's some kind of a wonderful thing. Democracy is just an expedient. I mean, often a welcome expedient. It's not as though I'm necessarily opposed to it. If we're part of this co-op, then we put it to a vote, and I guess that's better than otherwise. But obviously that's just 51% of the people necessarily and possibly imposing their will on the other 49%. It's doesn't necessarily produce outcomes you and I as individuals support, and we could be just as tyrannized by that majority as we would by employers, and employers, on the other hand, are often trained in how to manage the company, trained in how to manage labor, and sometimes we can be happier in that situation than in a worker-owned firm under so-called democracy, which you seem to think is a wonderful ideal. It's an expedient. It's not an ideal.
Well, I do believe it's an expedient, but I feel it works. I mean, I did before my family business did get crushed by the pandemic. We were a worker co-op. That's what I had turned it into, and it was working fairly decently.
Well, really, that's wonderful, Connor.
Well, see, that was the thing, right? So one day I woke up and I said, if I actually believe in these things, I have to actually do them.
Well, okay, Connor. I vastly respect you. You've got this weird last name, Exum. Did you change your name?
No, that's from England.
That's from England. Well, yeah, no, a sense of community with others. But I will say, I worked for Barron's. The people who ran Barron's magazine, they had about 40 employees. It was well managed. I was at the New York Stock Exchange prior to that as a senior economist. The New York Stock Exchange was filled with jerks running it, and so indeed, there's nothing really more offensive than a boss who egotistically wastes talent, who tyrannizes over people. And so that's terrible. But when a company is well run and it's run by somebody in charge who's taking on the headaches, there can be a sense of community there as well. And again, I will only tell you that I've been in two co-ops. I've been in landlord buildings. Co-ops can be pretty damn ugly.
Oh, sure.
Well, you say, oh, sure. It's wonderful. But again, I'm only saying that I think it's great that you were part of a worker-owned company where people were happy being a part of that company and had a sense of community and a sense of shared experience running the company. All of that's great. But again, it's not necessarily something that can happen everywhere. It can often end up in ugly situations. And so when I say, democracy doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's happy, or that everybody's fulfilled. It can be worse than a conventionally run firm.
Well, now I'm going to disagree with you just a little bit. I think that you have a higher propensity for outcomes that are positive with democracy than with an authoritarian model. That's just my personal opinion.
Okay, well, no, all right. Well, okay, fair enough. No, actually, that's up for grabs. I would agree. I think that, though, that, again, you should then work on it, try to get people interested in it. You do really meet a lot of people in life who don't take their jobs that seriously. It's just a way. What's the most? What for most people is the most inspiring thing about the jobs they do? The fact that it supports their family. The fact that they can provide for their children. That gives them a sense of purpose in life. They're not that interested in what the firm does. They're not that. It doesn't necessarily turn them on. In a division of labor society, you're not necessarily going to have people who love everything that they do. I was lucky. I liked writing. And I felt I was serving the readership. That I was working for the readership when I was at Barron's. And of course, I run a debate society. I feel I'm servicing the people who come to my debate society. So, but not everybody has that attitude. So for many people, they just want to get by and get a job and support their families. They're not interested in taking the time to help run the firm.
That is absolutely true. But I think that's an attitude that, on the socialist side, we have to start to change. The engagement factor there. Well,
again, I know you. I gather that you had Juliet Schur on, and I gather that it was a friendly interview. I think I read one of Juliet Schur's books years ago. She's been at it for quite a while. Yeah. Julie, as you were calling her, and she says that people should work less, and so sometimes when you're running a worker-owned firm, you have to work more.
Yes. Well, I don't particularly believe in that we're going to work less necessarily all the time.
Well, that's her one of her big.
That is her big high point. But I did like her other steady state economic growth plans more.
With horses to pour up horse manure, what's your? Look, I was a part of the Back to the Land movement. Look, the greenest place to live is where I live in Manhattan. Not where you live, because when we went back to the land, back to the country, and we imagined we could be running on windmills, we found to our dismay that we needed cars and gasoline more than ever, and that we needed gasoline-powered saws to cut the wood, and that we, of course, I did burn wood because that was polluting. To warm the house I lived in the country, but the fact is, if you live in a city, then you. I don't own a car. Everything's within walking distance. Things are trucked in much more efficiently. I share walls with other people, so heating my home is much cheaper. My energy use is probably 50% of yours. You probably own a car, right, Connor?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Well, you have to. I don't have to own a car.
I didn't own a car when I lived in a city either. When I lived at Louisville, Kentucky.
But I'm trying to say.
So I'm saying that I have the same experience as you do, and I know how much cheaper it can be. I mean, urban living. So I wouldn't necessarily throw us all back to the 1870s.
I didn't say cheaper. Well, the 1870s, we would have been drowning in horse manure because obviously the energy was based on horses. Thank God we got cars. The horse manure problem would have been absolutely insupportable. We were never living under a steady state economy, never ever, and we certainly aren't now. That hasn't been the way industrialization happens. What? I'm sorry?
I was going to say, yes, that hasn't been. I mean, it's a pro-growth movement, industrialization right now, and has been since the turn of the century. And before that. Well, I meant the turn of the 19th century.
Well, horses, the use of horses and animals was a huge improvement for humankind, but it was unsustainable. It went on for centuries. And now the use of fossil fuels has been a huge improvement for humankind, and it's going to go on for centuries. Now, I guess you think that because the Earth is 2 degrees hotter, I guess you buy that argument. I'm not sure where you come out there. But anyway, I'm picking a fight with you for no good reason, Con. Let's get back to.
Well, it's okay. I do believe in global warming.
I believe in global warming too. It's very cold outside right now, and you believe in global warming. All right, fine. Well, I will only tell you, Connor, that you should read Stephen Koonen's book called Unsettled. Stephen Koonen is a climate scientist, and I had him at the SoHo Forum, and he points out that global warming began in the late 1800s. That continued through the 20th century, and that one of the fastest warming periods was from 1910 to 1940, and the reason why the reason why that's key is that it wasn't until about 1950 that anybody would argue that human contributions began to become significant. The fact is that we are going through a natural warming trend, and if you read his book, he points out all of the decisive factors that determine the temperature of the Earth. And so the fact is that it's happening mostly for natural reasons, not because of what man is doing. That's because a stunner, I guess you feel he's crazy, but I will say that he's a professor at NYU, and he was an appointee in the Obama administration. And so and he is a trained climate scientist. And so the idea that we are warming the planet is very dubious. Mostly it's happening through natural causes. And what that basically means is that we can't do too much about it. On the other hand, then if you deal with the problem, we are 2.5 degrees warmer than we were. The sea levels are rising. And by every index, people are living better than they ever did. We had nothing but, by and large, nothing but progress for humankind across the globe, while the Earth has been warming by about 2.5 degrees.
I see you're taking, what's his name, out of Yale. That was his argument, that global warming in the 90s might be good. What was his name? He's an economist out of Yale. Oh, Robert Nordhaus.
Well, you're talking about, well, William Nordhaus was He's talking about a car. He won a Nobel Prize because he talked about a carbon tax.
True, but he pushed that in the early 90s before he came up with the carbon tax. His idea was that don't worry about global warming because it's going to be okay. More property is going to be able to be farmed, and we'll be able to fix, all these issues with development and hunger. That was
development and hunger. All I said just right now, Connor, was that we've had 2.5 degrees of warming, and everything has gotten better in the world. Well,
I know, but that was his argument.
It's not an argument. It's an FACT. It's a fact. It's a verifiable fact that the deaths and problems that are due to disruptions like tornadoes, like hurricanes, are at a record low. It's a fact that in India, China, across the world, people are living better than ever before, that death rates are down, that there's been enormous progress over the last 50 years, even as the earth has warmed by 2.5 degrees. That's a verifiable fact, often overlooked by the crazy climate alarmists. The climate issue is basically a matter of religion. It's not a matter of verifiable fact. Now, then, what about the future? Well, I'm not saying that there won't be problems. The earth is going to warm by another 2.5 degrees, most likely because of natural causes. Most likely. Will we be able to muddle through? Probably we will be able to. Is it going to cause any great problem? It's already caused some problems. Obviously, the sea levels are now about 12 inches higher than they used to be. And of course, go to Amsterdam. Those poor people, they live underwater. Did you know that?
Yes.
And it's a hell of a thing for them. It's just awful.
Amsterdam, Belgium, they're all the lowlands, and they all are.
Well, it's what you call, we used to call them dikes,
Yes.
Of course, you can't. Anyway, but
I think we have to look at right now look what's happening in California, the massive
the
storms.
rains. It's raining in California. That's
raining. It's beyond rain. I mean, they got 29 inches in one day in one area.
Okay. Right. All right. I don't know. Look, we're now playing the game. For the past 200, the game. You don't know for the past 200 years, we've had crazy weather events. And for the past 1,000 years, we've had crazy weather events in different places of the world, and everybody attributes that to global. Like California is a completely fucked up situation with Governor Gavin Newsom. They ought to be able to learn how to retain their water. Maybe ultimately they'll do desalination. But in fact, if you're going to say the 29 inches of rain is due to global warming, then I can only tell you that before we had global warming, we had crazy weather events. You always have crazy weather events.
Sure we do.
But Connor, I know we got ground in that point. I don't know. I've just started to pick a fight with you about that, but I'm not clear where we're at. I was mentioning Juliet Schor and her Michigas, and I'm not sure. You don't necessarily support Juliet Schor's arguments anyway. Is that right?
Not all of them, but I do tend to focus on the steady state economy model. That's the answer to a lot of our issues.
That's windmills and solar panels, Connor.
Not always. It could be. It could be.
Well, it can't be now, Connor. I can only tell you that the poor people of the world are dying for they need fossil fuels in order to pull themselves out of poverty. The government of India, the foreign minister of India, he's buying oil like there's no tomorrow from the Russians because as he said that if the 400 million citizens of India are going to continue to improve their standard of living, they need fossil fuels, and they can't make do with windmills and sun because we can't either. I've had debate. I've hosted 2 debates on this with Bjorn Lundberg as well, who's written about it. Perhaps you've heard of him.
Yes.
You mentioned William Nordhaus. William Nordhaus is a different animal in this. Yeah. William Nordhaus actually believes this is an interesting divide. I will tell you about. William Nordhaus talks about a carbon tax.
Yes, he does.
And carbon, but Stephen Koonin is actually too embarrassed to tell him that the truth of the matter is that most likely most of global warming is being brought about by natural causes, and because again. One of the fastest periods of warming was from 1910 to 1940. It started in the late 1800s, and then in addition, we have difficulty accounting for what's been happening over the last 30 years. So the warming slowed at a time when the carbon dioxide was building up. The fact is that the evidence is overwhelming that water vapor and other factors are really in the saddle with respect to global warming, and so a carbon tax isn't going to mean very much either. The fact is that we're warming because of natural causes, and it's probably not a disaster for human beings. Certainly, up till now, it hasn't been. On the contrary, people are living better than ever before, mainly because they've been using fossil fuels. But anyway, so that's Juliet Schor. But that part of it you seem to agree with, because we don't have any steady state possibility right now. Oh, okay, we don't. All right, yeah.
Not right now. It would take a total revamping of our whole economic system to even
Well,
start.
it would take a total impoverishment of humanity to bring it about, because we do not have the technology. If we abandoned fossil fuels, which, by the way, the people in India and China and Bangladesh refuse to do, they are going to be the major contributions to global warming coming from those 2 or 3 billion people in the poor countries of the world, and they are installing coal mine plants, coal-based economies. They are buying oil. They are not going to resort to the sort of thing that Juliet Shore possibly wants, because they know that way lies poverty. They are dying because they're burning dung in their homes. They're burning wood. They're dying from the wood smoke and from the dung. They need fossil fuels. So that's why if we did try to bring it about, we would bring impoverishment for the rest of the world, and it's not going to happen because the poor people of the world and their governments are not going to put up with it, are not going to accept it. So that's why it's not in the cards.
Well, I agree that it's not in the cards. I mean,
and if it were in the cards, it would be disastrous.
I don't think it would be disastrous. I think Herman Daly points out a very good plan.
Whose does?
Herman Daly, Dr. Daly out of Maryland, University of Maryland, steady state economy, 1973.
I had Andrew Dessler debate the issue at the SoHo Forum, and he's at Texas A&M, and he's a climate scientist. So he's got a very good plan for wind and sun. Is that it?
Yeah. Well, no, not just wind and sun. I mean, he's the one who pretty much in the 1970s made steady state economy something that would
what
be
would the
considered.
steady state economy's energy sources be based on?
What would they be based on? Well, they could be based on fossil fuels still. The idea is to just maintain. So if you're going to grow, say 15%, right?
Okay.
Your energy needs going to grow 15%. For your population, then you use 15% more resources to cover it. You don't pull out 30 or 40. You don't try to go above what you actually need.
Well, again,
So,
the poor people of the world in China and India, they often don't have the rudiments of a fossil fuel based economy. They're burning wood and dung. They don't own cars. They don't own so therefore they want to live more or less the way you and I live. And if they do so, they're going to have a quantum leap in the use of fossil fuels.
Right. That's another part of it, is that maybe the westernized nations need to reduce exactly how much they're using to offset the increase in the southern part of the globe.
Oh, okay. Well, I can only tell you, that's an interesting question. I can only tell you that if you do the math, that it's not going to happen either. But
no,
we turned this into a discussion of climate change. Maybe you want to talk about something else, but go ahead. What do you want to talk about?
Well, that's fine. Getting back to the first part about socialism and your argument that we should try it on the ground up. Do you notice that perhaps the reason why these authors in the popular socialist press seem to never actually attain the socialist goals they want? I mean, for example, Bhaskar Sunkara was hit in 2018 after he gave his debate with you with the fact that he had fired all the workers of the Tribune.
Yeah, I heard about that. Actually, his name is Bhaskar Sunkara.
Sunkara. Yeah,
he's a nice guy, by the way.
I'm not saying he's not a nice guy, but I'm just saying that.
Well, yeah, fight. Yeah. I'm trying to remember. It was, that was. Is that true? I sort of vaguely recall that.
It's true.
I know that scandal arose. I thought he had some kind of response to that. Is he at Nation magazine now?
Yes, he's the president of the Nation.
President of the Nation magazine.
Really? Yeah, that's right.
Oh wow, and that's the Nation magazine with 100-year history.
That's correct.
Interesting.
They just made him last February.
But it's not. Well, I guess part of the hypocrisy point in that case is that the Nation is probably not a worker co-op.
No, it's not either. No,
yeah.
Nor is it really that socialist. I mean, it's progressive, but not socialist.
Yeah.
But I was just wondering, have you noticed that this trend, right? This lack. I mean, Professor Wolff doesn't go out and actually form worker co-ops or write books on really how to do it.
Oh, well, well, actually, look, he wrote a book. I mean,
I know, Democracy in the Workplace. I read it. I was very
I
disappointed.
read it. Perhaps you know the joke about what happened. I read it and I quoted it back to him in our debate. So
And
he
he didn't
got up and
understand
said that a book is like a child. I forgot what I wrote in that book. He wrote, and I got up. I said, "Well, I read the book only a month ago, and I guess I remember it better than Richard does." But people were actually defending that. I then had an interview with somebody from NPR, I think it was, and she said, "Well, Professor Wolff said a book is like a child, and therefore you can't expect him to, it just crazy dodging. He writes a book and he won't even stand by it." So again, we're talking about people whose arguments are so ludicrous. It does. I'm probably getting rather exercise with you. I better slow down. Because what does exercise me is to see that Richard Wolff and Bhaskar still get a lot of attention, and yet their arguments are just so ludicrous. As you say, they can't even live their own philosophy. Although I wonder if Julia Shore lives her own philosophy, by the way.
I think she probably does get closer because she is a professor. You can get closer to the 4-day work week.
Oh, well, that's true. You get close to the 2-day work week.
That's right. So I mean, you can live your values. So
Yeah.
But what I was getting at there is that we see it over and over and over again, and I thought it was so interesting that as a libertarian, you just kept on pointing out the most obvious thing: just do it.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'm interested in this with you. You had your firm went under because of
we did restaurants, and a lot of our clients went out, and the stress of the restaurant pressure during the pandemic was quite
I would say
aggressive.
during the lockdowns, of course, during the lockdowns. I mean, you might have survived if they haven't locked you down. But you serviced. What was the nature of your service?
Oh well, we installed hood systems, and we did kitchen industrial cleaning of the equipment, the hoods, all that kind of stuff, floors.
And so
people just start, when they had fewer and fewer people there, they stopped, off wanting those services. And I guess I'm better in theory than I am in actual management because I'm a philosopher by training.
Well, don't be so hard on yourself. If the lockdowns were, again, I believe we could talk about that as well. Sure. I hate it. I dislike it. And I myself do not ever talk about the pandemic, about COVID. I just talk about the lockdowns. Okay. There didn't have to be lockdowns. There could have been the focus protection, which was called for by the Great Barrington Declaration. And a lot of lives would have been saved, and a lot of businesses would have been saved. But so you were the victim of a pretty draconian policy in New York State, and so I think that you probably managed your company very well. How many people were in your firm at its peak?
At the peak, we had 5 plus. Okay.
All right,
it was a small company.
Well, kind of a partnership. All right. Fair enough. Yeah.
Right, but it was a perfect number for what I wanted to do, and I was building it. It had lasted 40 years before the lockdown.
40 years?
Yeah, it was started by my father in 1974, and I got it in 2015. I grew it up quite large. I mean, he ran it 40 years, basically, as you would describe most small businesses, basically just a paycheck. It didn't have a profit margin or anything like that, but we were growing quite well until the pandemic hit.
Well, and what do you, as I say, until the lockdown hit, Connor, in my view, but I guess you and I disagree. I think if there hadn't been a lockdown, maybe the restaurants could have survived. If there hadn't been all this scare talk from government about how you're going to die from it, the vast majority of people under the age of 50 were not dying from it. Is now so many of us have had it already, and we know it's not exactly all that fear and craziness came from government. But so therefore, I would say it was the lockdown and the fear that government instilled that destroyed you, that hurt you. But what have you been doing since?
I've been trying to build up a podcast, go back to my writing and stuff that I enjoy, from a philosophical stand, because that's what I have a degree in.
So
philosophy of mind.
But right now, so you have enough savings to sort of survive?
Yeah, I have enough until I can figure out what's going on.
I see. 40-year.
Yeah.
Well, it's almost. I mean, when I think about it, of course, if you think about 40 years, then you survived the Great Recession.
We grew during the Great Recession. We didn't just survive it; we grew.
Really? And are you talking about servicing restaurants in the area where you live right now?
Yeah, in Ulster County, Greene County, and a lot in Dutchess County.
Well, I see. You're not. I guess to get the impression that you could possibly revive your firm. You have the skills, the knowledge.
Oh, yeah, I could,
but you don't really want to. Is that it? You'd rather?
I'd rather not. I don't know.
It's not you. You're more of a. You're not really a business person. You're of a philosophical bent. So I will tell you kind of that. Ironically, then when you talk about turning people on to worker ownership, I'm like you in a way. I was just content to be in my little sandbox, writing my column, responding to my readers in economics, doing book reviews. I had some speaking gigs. So that was my sandbox. I didn't want to take on the headaches of running News Corp or running Barron's. You sound like you might be the same kind of person, Connor.
To a certain degree, but I feel that if I believe in it,
you too are a walking hypocrite, Connor. Good.
Well, no, wait, I did it.
What?
I did it. I did it, even though that I didn't really,
you're not doing it anymore.
But I do have plans to go back to something different, but still a collective. If you listen, I want to create a collective news association that
News.
Okay. That gets right on the street level, from the ground up, the workers' point of view, and we can create that. So that's my new project.
Why, when you call yourself an anarcho-syndicalist, you don't call yourself an anarcho-capitalist. Why do you like the word syndicalism?
Because I believe in that we should have syndicates. The unionized formulation for specific industries. The group for people that do Uber Eats, and the people that do restaurants, and so on and so forth.
Okay, all right. I see what you mean. Well, because you like worker ownership. All right. You understand when you talk about unions, conscious of, when there's unions, there's management. But you don't, there's no management. The unions are the management.
Management. In syndicalism.
Yeah. And so if the firm goes under, then just as your firm went under, then the union goes under with it, and then.
That branch of it would.
Well, yeah.
It could be supported by other branches.
Okay. Then of course when you start thinking about all of the problems and difficulties, then you just touched on one, which is that I'm working in one branch. We've been working hard. We've been managing well, and then the other branch they mismanage and they're not doing well, and we're supposed to bail them out. Well, they didn't manage well. Maybe they weren't working that hard. So there could be a lot of resentment about that.
There is that is always a possibility. I completely agree with you. There's always the human issue there with resentment and competition and infighting and what do we have to do? We have that in any corporation.
Yeah, and indeed, the real reason why, in one sense, the reason why people who manage firms are paid well to manage those firms is that they have to make tough decisions. They have to be the bad guys. They have to lay people off if there's a problem. They've got to move. And when I was at Barron's, we had a boss, a manager who was really a great guy in many ways. But if somebody was if a couple of people in the firm at Barron's was slacking off, he just allowed it to happen. He never, and there was the resentment because of it, because he always wanted to be Mr. Nice Guy. And so my point is that often resentments can arise in situations like that, and a boss who's managing a firm has got to realize that if you allow certain people to take advantage, the other people who are working hard in the firm are going to start to resent it. So you have to do something unpleasant and bear down on those people and tell them you're taking advantage. You're not really earning your keep. and because other people in the firm are noticing it. So I'm just saying all those problems arise, and somebody's got to make the tough decisions, and that's the reason. And most of us do not like to make tough decisions. Most of us want to be Mr. Nice Guy and be popular, and that's part of the reason why many of us are not interested in worker ownership, because we'd rather not vote for a resolution that's going to hurt others, even though it may be necessary in order to maintain the survival of the firm.
Oh, that's absolutely true. But sometimes you have to make these hard decisions, like you said, and even so, I mean, we make them all the time through voting.
Yeah, bosses make them all the time, and you got to get paid. Well, mostly it's bosses. Because most firms are bossed. Most firms do have top-down structures, and so my point is that people make those decisions. Look, what's his name? I forget the name of the guy who brought in to take over IBM, and I you perhaps remember the name.
What year was it? The 90s? Or the 2000s?
IBM was basically on the ropes by the early 90s. It had been. I had a friend who was working as a consultant at IBM, and he said the place was just a madhouse of people doing nothing, going to meetings and bullshitting. It just became a cash cow for the employees. And then IBM was having increasing trouble. It was on the brink of bankruptcy. He came in and he basically fired 2/3 of the staff. And IBM survived as a large firm, but only with 1/3 of the, at least at that point. I don't know if it's grown since. My point is that when a firm consists of people who are taking advantage of the success of the firm, then it can grow into a bureaucracy that doesn't serve the interests of the customers who buy from that firm, and people have to come in who do things that are very unpleasant. My only point is that if that's going to be the case, then it would have to be done by the workers, and many of us just don't want to do it. I'm only talking about a reason why many of us do not want to be a part of running a firm, because we don't want to make tough decisions of that kind.
It's hard because they're your friends and they're your co-workers. So, but we saw Mondragoon made the tough decisions during 2008. But they were very humane. They reduced half the staff, and they put them on a rotating, 1/3 schedule.
Mondragon?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, as I say, I thought you obviously know more up to date with Mondragon than I am. But again, Mondragon has this cushion where it's got a lot of employees, and so it's really a hybrid in that sense. It's not really a worker-owned firm for many of the workers.
Well, in Spain, it's more worker-owned.
Yeah, exactly.
All the outside companies, all the companies they bought in like South America or France, those are all employees. That's where it gets a little tricky.
Well, right, but the point is why, if you really believe it,
you would have switched all those over to
if you read it, you wouldn't do it that way. That would be that would be kind of your philosophy. So they have this cushion. They have the privilege elite. That was often what was happening in Japan. So it's clearly a cop out. The idea that the excuses that these people are Spanish is not exactly an excuse that you and I would respect.
No, I don't respect that. But I'm just saying that there are some big issues with how they expanded, especially in South America, how they use those workers and how they were importing those workers as part-time workers into Spain.
Oh.
But then, of course, there's also the village of Marinalda in Andalusia. It's the 40-year project of a true communist who went back to the fields and did it.
I'm sorry, you're no longer talking about Mondragon? You're talking about
no, it's a village with this mayor's Sanchez Gordello, who's been running it for 40 years, since 1979, 40 plus years now. And it's totally communist. It's another question. I mean, we never hear that in the newspapers that are supposedly pro-socialism.
Which country?
Spain, Andalusia.
Wow. Something about those Spanish, hey, kind of.
I do have a little Spanish blood, so that's probably the anarchist in me.
Okay, there you go. Now we got to the root of it.
You see,
who you are.
It's inborn.
That says a lot, kind of. But look, again, I'm in awe of your idealism, and I encourage you to go for it. You want to start a cooperative news organization, and that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
I thought Jacobin was supposed to be like that.
No, it was supposed to be current affairs, but he fired all his staff in 2020 when they decided they wanted to become more part of the power structure.
I see.
That's when Nathan J. Robinson fired them all, and cried that it was his project after all. See, I have a low ego. I don't really care that much about having my name on anything.
I see. Well, you and I have very little to argue about, Connor, except for the global warming issues. But that aside, I support what you do, and again, I would prefer to live in that kind of society, because then you could really encounter a lot of grown-ups in the world. You could encounter people who really understand the main bad news that we economists bring to the world, which is that in a world of scarce resources. Why is this world of scarce resources? Because actually, I'm going to offend you by this, because as Thomas Sowell put it, what everybody wants always adds up to more than there is. We always have poor people, and we do have to rations. So resources are scarce, and therefore things involving those scarce resources have a cost. And people are not aware of those costs. And of course, the primary thing progressives talk about is, well, the government has the money, the government should spend the money, as though the government is not taking it from others in order to spend it on others. So therefore, people they look at one side of the ledger, they don't understand the cost of things and the difficulties of running a firm. And your worker-owned ideal would bring about a world of grown-ups, and I applaud that goal. Yeah.
Well, I do have to say one thing. I disagree. I think that because I do tend to focus on the MMT theory. That was terrible that she never wanted to, Stephanie Kelton.
Monetary tyranny is what I call it. Well, you focus. What about the MMT?
I mean, it has value as a monetary policy, but I think it's limited. I was surprised that Stephanie Kelton didn't want to talk about the monetary policies that would be generated during such a catastrophe as the lockdowns.
Well,
with you,
as far as I gather, okay, now we do have something to argue about, Connor. As far as I gather, the MMT recipe said that when you're MMTing and you start hitting price inflation, and certainly we have had price inflation that's been a little bit disturbing, then you're supposed to raise taxes. That's what the MMT recipe says. But now I think Stephanie Kelton and the other modern monetary tyrants are not interested in that, because it's kind of an embarrassing thing to talk about, because it has so quickly given rise to the sort of thing they said is bad news. They don't like price inflation. But apart from that, what really surprises me, Connor, is that you, who believe in democracy, also believe in MMT. You do understand that the basic idea of MMT is that the government doesn't have to tax or borrow in order to finance its operations. It could just print the stuff. It could just print money. And my problem with it, and why I call it tyranny, is that at least if the government is going to spend, it has to go to the people and say, to articulate the cost of that spending by saying, we've got to tax you more, or at least we've got to borrow more, and we're going to work up debt, and we're going to have to pay off that debt. So at least to that extent, it's answerable to the people, and it's articulating the fact that this involves a cost, our spending. But if it can simply resort to the printing press, then it can do it in a very stealthy way. It doesn't have to go to the people for the money. It can simply grab those resources by monopolizing the money supply and grabbing the people's wealth through that stealthy way. And that's why I call it tyranny. So you, as a Democrat, should not like MMT. You should oppose it if we're going to have a government.
I think that that view misses a lot about what MMT really is about. I mean, it's about a budget policy. So, we vote on the budget policy, right?
The budget policy is about printing money to finance the operations of government, not through taxes and not through borrowing, but through printing money. I just summarized the budget policy.
Sure, but I'm just saying that
antithetical to the workings of democracy, because it gives the government the power to just unilaterally print the money rather than articulate to the people that we need to raise the money through taxes or borrowing. That's why it's tyrannical.
Well, I think that if we vote on the budget itself, it's not tyrannical anymore, is it? I mean,
Well, again, if we vote on the budget itself, okay. Well, first of all, we don't often get a chance to work on the budget.
no, we don't. But supposedly,
51% of the people vote for it. Isn't that tyrannizing the other 49%?
well, I mean, what else are you going to do?
What else? Well, then they have to go to the people and make them feel it. And you, as an anarchist, because on top of that, should even have a problem with that. But then if they have to raise it through taxes, then every individual will feel it in a visceral way. Will know that this is the cost of what government is doing. Because if we print the money, then it becomes kind of a superstitious myth that government has the power to do what it wants. That's the problem. We can articulate to people what it's all about, but then to 100% of the people what it's all about. And then even some of those 51% who voted on printing the money would vote against it, because then they realize this is hurting our pocketbook. I paid $5,000 in taxes last year. Now I'm paying $9,000 in taxes, and I feel it. That's a reality that human beings will feel, rather than this cockamamie idea. Oh, well, we just printed the money. We just, it's so easy. We just printed the money. So so that's why there's a huge difference in terms of the way people experience their lives. And what's wrong with raising the money through taxes anyway? Why can't we raise the money through taxes? Why is that a problem for the MMTers, and why is that a problem for you?
Well, it's a problem for the MMTers because the belief is that, and to me, is because the belief is that the taxes don't actually fund anything, right? We make the budget, we spend first, and then we tax later, right? So what we're doing is we're taxing out all of the expenses that,
The taxes don't fund anything. I know what you're talking about. We need,
sure.
we need,
except for like the state level, because they're tax users. We're talking about the federal government, right? So the federal government, right? It could burn that money, the tax money. All it's trying to do is just
burn it. What do you mean? Yeah. The federal government burns its money?
No, it doesn't actually burn
the
money.
Why do you make such a sense? The federal government takes money and it spends it. That's what happens.
Not in the MMT story. The MMT story is that we take the money, right? We create the budget, we spend the money, we use the taxes to decrease inflation and control the monetary policy.
Well, again, what you and I want for the federal government to do is when it has a policy, a proposal for a spending bill, then it's got to raise the money through taxes. That's all. That's what we want. We want a change in government. That's the change we want. We want a government that envisioned by the founding fathers, which is that if you want to spend the money, then you've got to have a plan to raise that extra money through taxes. That's what we will dictate. If you're saying it doesn't work that way, the reason it doesn't work that way, by the way, is that we do have the printing press. If we abolish the printing press, then the only way for government to raise the money is through taxes. That's all.
So that'd be alternating the whole system to something new. I mean, we would be going back to
the vision of representative and constitutional government, back to the way the government should work. That's all.
What you want to get rid of is the fiat currency.
I would like to get rid of the fiat currency, but that's another matter. I want to get I want to get rid of the Federal Reserve. I want to get rid of the government's power to print money. That's all.
So then who's going to print the money then?
Who's going to print the money?
Well, I mean, that was our big problem back in the 1800s, right? Everyone was
kind of. I guess we've had all kinds of. First of all, I'm amazed. You're supposed to be an anarchist, so who's going to print the money into your anarchy?
Well, I mean, that system's fine. I mean, we could.
I said something your anarchy.
Sure.
Well, there's no government, right? So I'm not even clear where you're at. If you're going to have no government, then who's going to print the money? For you, just for you.
Well, for us, we'd have to vote on it. We could have a printing press syndicate that does that. They would be the Treasury syndicate, and they would print all our funds.
Well, let me tell you one thing, Connor, because again we've opened up all kinds of broad issues. The U.S. economy, as imperfect as it was run from 1870 to 1913, where there are records, that's a 43-year period. And why do I choose 1913? Because that's when the Federal Reserve was created. If we look at every indicator of how the U.S. economy was run, basically they used gold. You've heard of that? So we didn't need to print money, they used gold. And that's how money arises. The U.S. economy, according to every indicator of stability, inflation, whatever measure you want, now compared after the Federal Reserve was created, and from 1913 to the present, we've had far more instability under the regime of the Fed. And then on top of that, if you want to forgive the Federal Reserve for the Great Depression, which occurred a number of years after the Fed was created, and even take the period since World War II, then once again, we've had more instability under the Fed than we had prior to the creation of the Fed. But if your question is who would print the money? Well, we don't need anybody to print the money. We would simply have banks issuing money against gold, just like we had prior to 1913 when the economy was better run. And I guess you probably bought the bullshit in some of the textbook about this, but the fact of the matter is that that's all bullshit. The fact is that most recently, I'm forgetting her name, this economist and her husband, she worked for Clinton. She was a mainstream economist. She has shown that business cycles, ups and downs of the economy, were actually less severe from the period from 1870 to 1913. So the answer is, who would print the money? Well, the money is created through gold, or we could adopt Bitcoin, and the government would be out of the money business. Yeah.
Okay, that's just what I was getting. I wanted to see if you were going to go back to the bank notes, the true concept of a bank note.
Well, again, I don't know. I'm just amazed that you, as an anarchist, can have any love for the idea that government, anytime it wants to spend more money, can just print it. And then you say, well, we don't like a situation in which the government just declares it's going to do something, and then it just, and then later on it raises the taxes. Indeed, we want to choke off the government's money supply, because that gives the government the powers of abuse that you and I, as anarchists or as libertarians, should object to. That's the reason why government has seized the people's money, because government has the power over the creation of money, then it abuses that power. It fights its wars. It finances its welfare state. But our budget is now on a collision course anyway. And then getting back to the MMTers, you're saying you don't know why they're not speaking up, because they're too chicken to. Because according to their scenario, we've had price inflation and we should be raising taxes. If you actually read them, that's their.
I've read.
Well, they're hypocrites. They're not calling for the raising of taxes.
I noticed that. Well, there's
you noticed that. Well, that's good.
There's another policy that they could have used as well.
Yeah.
To suck more money out, job creation, more job programs. According to if you read it, that's another way of sucking up the excess cash.
You're the most peculiar kind of anarchist I've ever met. The government's going to create jobs. The fact is that we've got about 9 or 10 million jobs in the private sector that are going begging right now, and the government is going to create. Now you want more socialism. Government created jobs, make work jobs.
Well, I didn't say I support it or not support it. I was just saying that's another method that they support to soak up.
Have they come out for job creation?
Yeah, that's one of their. That's if you
recently have they come out for job creation?
Yes, one of them has. What's her name? Out of Bard. What's her name? The case for our jobs.
Well, I'm pretty amazed that you, as an anarchist, can be enchanted by these lunatics. Job creation is a part of government. We have 10 million private sector jobs that are going begging, and we need job creation. All right. Anyway,
I was just saying that's one of their other. So
well, again,
they don't use the taxes. They can use.
It just the more you unfold this, the more insane and stupid it sounds, Connor. But that aside. I guess I'm not going to persuade you that we need to abolish the Federal Reserve again.
Okay,
very simple. We need to abolish the Federal Reserve. We need to understand that money comes from people. Money comes from a commodity, or it comes from Bitcoin. We have alternatives. And by the way, I invite you to come to New York City. I guess we should conclude. I should do my own plug. On January 26th, we're going to have a debate on the abolition of the Federal Reserve. And Larry White, who's a professor at George Mason, is going to defend the resolution that the economy would work better if we abolish the Federal Reserve. And obviously, he's going to answer your question, Connor, is what do we replace it with? Well, he's going to answer that question. And opposing him is going to be Lawrence Mishkin, a professor of banking at Columbia University, who was on the board of governors of the Federal Reserve. So he's going to be your man. I will only tell you that I've been advised I should perhaps have a debate on modern monetary theory, but I regarded it as so ludicrous and so contradictory that I think it almost dignifies it to have a debate about it. But maybe I should, because Connor Exum, my ideal anarcho-syndicalist, actually believes in MMT, and it's appalling that you do. But why don't you come to New York and come to that debate, Connor? Because you probably want to know, what are we going to do if we abolish the Federal Reserve and we take the legs out from those crazy MMTers? Because they're no longer going to be able to print money.
I am. I will have to check my schedule.
Connor? You must be very alarmed.
I'm not alarmed, not really. Well, but I have to check. I will have to check my schedule and see. Okay. It's still down in Soho.
Well, it's actually NoHo. It's a little bit north of Houston. We had our first meeting in Soho, and so that's why I call it the SoHo Forum still. But it's on Bleecker Street, 18 Bleecker Street at the Sheen Center, and so that's a block or two north of Houston.
Okay, so
yeah,
so closer to NYU, right?
Basically within walking distance of NYU. That's correct. Yes, and Connor, because you are an anarcho-syndicalist whom I have a high regard for, because I like you personally.
Well, thank you.
Free ticket. $24 value, and also I'm introducing a new thing called the SoHo Forum Bastiat Society Salon. Did you know what was Bastiat's first name? Frederick Bastiat, the French economist.
Yes.
Yeah, and he's a great guy. So they have Bastiat Society. There's going to be a meeting that I'm organizing. The debate is going to be Thursday, January 26th, and then on the following Sunday, on the 29th, I'm going to have for an additional $15, come to a discussion group at my home as well. There's a party afterwards in my home after the debate.
Oh, wow.
And then also at my home, just a couple of blocks uptown, there will be a discussion group on the Sunday with Larry White, who will be the economist who defended the resolution. So you could come with your questions and say, what are we going to do without a Federal Reserve? Those MMTers are going to be very upset. And I'm upset, you could say, because I'm an MMT enthusiast. And so he can answer your questions. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And it was a pleasure to have you on. I hope to have you on again.
Pleasure. What's that?
I hope to have you on again about some
more. Oh, sure. Absolutely, Connor. I like you personally, and I think you're an earnest guy. And I encourage you in everything that you do, except your support for
MMT,
alarmists, and for MMT. But everything else you do, I think, is wonderful. And also, obviously, you're a very empathic interviewer, and you're interested in discussing ideas. You're my kind of guy. And so you have my email address. Write me if you would like a free ticket to the debate.
I will. That would be great. Thank you so much.
Okay.
That concludes our broadcast.
Yeah.
Yes, we did.
Yeah. All right. Well,